I'm Cassandra Hayes, 34, a financial consultant in Boston. The sharp sting across my cheek echoed through the reception hall as my brother's new bride slapped me. 200 guests froze. Champagne glasses suspended mid-air. Andrea's mascara-streaked face contorted with rage while Jason stood paralyzed, disappointment etched in his features. The elaborate wedding I refused to fund suddenly felt suffocating. What they didn't know was why I refused, a truth I'd kept buried for years. If you've ever had family expectations pushed on you, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and subscribe to join me through this painful journey. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I was always the responsible one. 4 years older than Jason, I embraced the role of protective big sister from the moment my parents brought him home from the hospital. Our dynamic was established early. I was the planner, the achiever, while Jason approached life with an easygoing charm that made everything look effortless. Our father, Martin, a meticulous accountant who tracked every penny in detailed spreadsheets, instilled in me the value of financial responsibility. Money doesn't grow on trees, Cassandra. He'd remind me whenever I asked for anything beyond the essentials. Mom, a dedicated high school English teacher named Diane, pushed academic excellence above all else. Your education is the one thing nobody can take from you, she'd say while checking my homework each night. The expectations for me were crystal clear. Excel in school, secure scholarships, pursue a practical career, and achieve financial independence. And I did exactly that. By contrast, Jason received a different kind of attention. His baseball games never went unattended. His social butterfly nature celebrated. That boy could charm the skin off a snake. Dad would chuckle whenever Jason talked his way out of trouble. Despite our different paths, Jason and I were close. I helped him with math homework and he taught me to lighten up when I became too intense. We shared inside jokes and secret nicknames for our strictest teachers. During thunderstorms, he'd still sometimes sneak into my room like he did when we were kids, and we'd build pillow forts until the lightning passed. My journey to financial stability wasn't easy. I worked part-time throughout high school and full-time during college summers. While friends traveled during breaks, I interned at financial firms building my resume. After graduating with honors, I immediately pursued my MBA while working entry-level positions, often pulling 80-hour weeks between work and study. The sacrifices were numerous. Missed vacations, postponed relationships, little social life. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, meal prepped to save money, and tracked every expense in a budget app that would have made my father proud. When friends splurged on designer clothes, I invested in quality basics that would last years. My one indulgence was premium coffee beans. Some comforts were non-negotiable. Jason's path couldn't have been more different. He changed majors 3 times, eventually settling on communications. After college, he spent 6 months backpacking through Europe, a trip partially funded by our parents with the understanding it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience before real life begins. Upon returning, he bounced between jobs in sales, marketing, and event planning, never staying anywhere longer than 2 years. Despite his inconsistent career trajectory, Jason never seemed to struggle financially, at least not visibly. The truth was I'd been his safety net numerous times. When his college bookstore ran out of used textbooks one semester, I covered the difference for the new ones. During a 3-month gap between jobs, I paid his rent just until things pick up. When his car needed a new transmission, I wrote the check because that's what family does. These financial rescues were always framed as temporary, exceptional circumstances. But over time a pattern emerged. My parents began to reference my financial stability whenever Jason needed something. "You know your brother is still finding his way," Mom would say. "It would mean so much if you could help." Dad was more direct. "You're doing so well, Cassandra. What's a few $100s to you?" I never resented helping Jason. He was my brother, and his gratitude seemed genuine. But I did notice how my financial assistance was increasingly expected rather than appreciated. Family conversations subtly shifted to include assumptions about my willingness to step in whenever needed. 3 years ago, everything changed when Jason met Andrea Barnes at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was striking tall with perfect blonde highlights and a presence that commanded attention. Her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of brunches at upscale restaurants, designer handbags, and vacations to destinations I'd worked years to afford. Our first meeting was pleasant enough. Drinks at a waterfront bar where Andrea ordered the most expensive cocktail and spoke enthusiastically about her recent trip to Santorini. When the bill came, "Your condo must have amazing views," she'd say after I mentioned my neighborhood. "Jason tells me you're doing really well at your firm." Each comment seemed designed to assess my financial status, rather than build a genuine connection. What concerned me most was how Jason changed around her. When I gently asked about these expenses during one of our rare solo lunches, he brushed it off. "Andrea helps me see that sometimes you need to invest in experiences," he said. "We only live once." "Right." I nodded and changed the subject, but a knot of worry began forming in my stomach, one that would only grow tighter in the months to come. The proposal was extravagant, exactly what Andrea had hinted she wanted. Jason rented a sailboat, hired a photographer to capture the moment, and presented a princess-cut diamond ring that I later learned cost 3 months of his salary. What Jason didn't mention to Andrea was that I had helped finance the proposal, lending him $2,000 when he came to me in a panic 2 weeks before the planned date. "It has to be perfect, Cass," he explained, showing me pictures of the ring he'd already put a deposit on. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I'll pay you back as soon as my commission check comes through next month." I agreed, of course. This was my little brother's happiness. I felt that familiar surge of big sister pride. The celebration dinner that followed at our parents' house was jubilant. Mom prepared Jason's favorite lasagna. Dad opened the expensive wine he'd been saving, and Andrea sparkled with happiness, her ring catching the light with every animated gesture. The conversation naturally turned to wedding plans. Mom ventured carefully. "Well, it's once in a lifetime," Andrea replied. Then, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she added, "Cassandra, you've been to Napa for work conferences, right? You know how magical it is." Before I could respond, she continued, "Jason always says how you've been his biggest supporter, how you've helped him through rough patches." The implication hung in the air, uncomfortable and unspoken. Jason shifted in his seat, studying his dessert plate with sudden intensity. Dad cleared his throat. "I'm sure Cassandra would want to help make your dream come true. She's always been generous with her success." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the sensation of being volunteered for something I hadn't agreed to. I managed a non-committal smile and steered the conversation toward safer topics. "Jason and I are so excited. The prices attached to these venues made my financial advisor brain short-circuit base packages starting at $50,000 before adding catering, flowers, or entertainment." Then came the coffee meeting with Jason. He suggested meeting at the small cafe where we'd spent countless hours during my college years. As soon as we sat down with our drinks, I knew what was coming. "So, Andrea and I have been crunching numbers," he began, stirring his latte with uncharacteristic focus. "Her parents are contributing what they can, but her dad's business has been struggling since the pandemic." I waited, giving him space to continue. "The thing is, Cass, this wedding means everything to Andrea. She's dreamed about it since she was a little girl." He finally looked up, his expression a mix of hope and discomfort. "We were hoping you might be able to help with some of the bigger expenses. The venue deposit is due next month, and honestly, we're a bit short." The word "short" turned out to be a massive understatement. What Jason was asking for wasn't a contribution. It was for me to fund the majority of a luxury wedding that would cost more than my first condo's down payment. I need to think about it. To me. That night I called my best friend Tara, who had known both Jason and me since high school. "They want you to pay for what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Cass." "Not a blank check," Tara replied. "Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary." Her words stayed with me as the pressure from all sides intensified. My parents began dropping comments about how special it would be if I could contribute to their happiness. Andrea added me to a wedding planning group chat where she shared daily inspiration photos of floral arrangements costing thousands and custom-designed invitations. "I guess you're too busy with work to care about your brother's special day?" Or, "Some things are more important than money, don't you think?" "We've secured the vineyard thanks to Cassandra. she announced to my aunt and uncle who were visiting. She's been such a blessing during this process. Later, when I pulled her aside to clarify that I hadn't yet agreed to anything, her expression hardened. Jason said you were on board. Are you backing out now? With deposits already paid. That night, I discovered they had indeed placed non-refundable deposits on venues and services they couldn't possibly afford, operating under the assumption that I would cover the balances. When I confronted Jason about this, his response stunned me. Andrea quit her job last month to focus on wedding planning, he revealed. We're a bit tight right now, but it's temporary. She'll go back to work after the honeymoon. The honeymoon, another expense I was apparently expected to subsidize, was planned for 2 weeks in the Maldives, staying in one of those picturesque overwater bungalows that populate travel influencers' Instagram feeds. During my next session with Dr. Mitchell, my therapist of 3 years, I broke down. Mitchell's response was measured but firm. Boundaries aren't about controlling others' behavior. They're about clarifying what you're willing to participate in. And the dismissal of my own financial journey and choices. This realization was tested at Andrea's bridal shower, a lavish affair at an upscale restaurant. Throughout the event, relatives I hadn't seen in years approached me with variations of the same question. I hear you're giving them quite the wedding gift. How generous of you. The breaking point came when Andrea, glowing with happiness and several glasses of champagne, clinked her glass for attention. I just want to thank my future sister-in-law, she announced to the room. Cassandra is taking care of the venue and catering, which means we can have the string quartet I've always dreamed of. The room erupted in applause while I sat frozen. My champagne flute gripped so tightly I feared it might shatter. I maintained my composure through the remainder of the shower, but afterward, I insisted on speaking with Jason alone. This has to stop, I told him, my voice shaking with emotion. I never agreed to pay for your wedding. The assumptions, the announcements, the pressure. It's not fair, Jason. His expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and finally disappointment. Andrea was just excited, he defended weakly. We thought it was understood. You've always helped me before. This isn't helping with rent or car repairs, I replied. This is tens of thousands of dollars for a single day. A day that should reflect what you two can actually afford. Andrea doubled down, adding me to an expanded wedding planning group chat that now included her bridesmaids, her mother, and a wedding planner they had somehow hired despite their budget concerns. My phone buzzed constantly with messages debating the merits of imported peonies versus garden roses. Only $400 more per centerpiece. Custom letterpress invitations, heirloom quality. And whether the groom's cake should be red velvet or chocolate hazelnut. The hazelnut is divine but costs a bit more. When I didn't respond to these messages, Andrea began tagging me directly. I muted the conversation but couldn't escape the mounting pressure. Andrea's mother began calling me directly, always opening with pleasantries before steering the conversation toward wedding expenses. Andrea mentioned you're handling the catering deposit. They need that by Friday. Shall I have them contact you directly? The situation reached new levels of tension during a family dinner at my parents' house, ostensibly to discuss final wedding details. Jason and Andrea arrived last, her carrying a massive binder embossed with "Our Perfect Day" in gold lettering. Before the main course was even served, Andrea had spread timeline printouts, vendor contracts, and photo inspiration across the dining table. She discussed each element as if my financial backing was guaranteed, using phrases like "Cassandra's contribution will cover," and "thanks to Cassandra, we've upgraded to." When I finally attempted to establish some boundaries, suggesting gently that I hadn't committed to funding these specific elements, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. But we've been planning with your contribution in mind for months, Andrea said, her voice tight. The deposits are non-refundable, Cassandra. My mother jumped in with her well-practiced mediator voice. I'm sure your sister wants to help make this special for you both. Don't you, Cassandra? Of course I want their day to be special, I replied carefully. But there seems to be a misunderstanding about the extent of my involvement. Andrea's eyes narrowed. Jason said you were on board. All eyes turned to my brother, who suddenly became very interested in rearranging his silverware. I thought you were, he mumbled. You've always helped before. This is different than helping with rent or car repairs. I responded, echoing our previous private conversation. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. Well, if it's about the money, Andrea said with a dismissive wave. I thought someone in your position wouldn't think twice about supporting family. The implication that I was being stingy despite my success stung, but before I could respond, Jason leaned forward with pleading eyes. Cass, you know how much this means to her, he said quietly. To us. That moment crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about patterns and expectations that had been building for years. The next day, I received a concerning call from my cousin Luke, who worked at the same company as Jason. But he was also spreading financial misinformation that could potentially impact my professional reputation. When confronted via text, Jason's response was defensive. People were asking about the wedding, and I didn't want to admit we couldn't afford what we'd planned. The situation deteriorated further when I discovered, through an accidental reply, I'll email, that Andrea had quit her pharmaceutical sales job 2 months earlier to focus on wedding planning full-time. Sitting in her calm, plant-filled office, I broke down the escalating situation. I feel manipulated, I admitted. Like I'm being forced into a corner where I either pay for extravagance I don't believe in, or become the villain who ruined their dream wedding. Dr. Mitchell's response was measured but firm. What concerns me most is how this pattern might continue after the wedding. If boundaries aren't established now, what's next? A house down payment? Private schools for future children? Held at an exclusive downtown restaurant with a prix-fixe menu that I knew cost over $100 per person. Throughout the event, relatives I rarely saw approached me with variations of the same comment. Andrea's mother made a toast thanking me specifically for making Andrea's dreams come true, while Andrea beamed in her seat of honor. After the shower games and gift opening, Andrea pulled me aside, champagne flute in hand. I've been meaning to tell you, she said, her words slightly slurred. We've decided to extend the reception by 2 hours. Everyone knows you're our wedding fairy godmother. Then, raising her voice, she clinked her glass for attention. Everyone. I just want to thank my amazing future sister-in-law one more time, she announced to the room of 30 women. Cassandra is taking care of the venue and catering, which means we can have the string quartet I've always dreamed of. Isn't she incredible? The room erupted in applause while I stood frozen, my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I maintained my composure through the remainder of the shower, smiling stiffly for photos and declining a third mimosa that I desperately wanted. Afterward, I insisted on speaking with Jason alone. I drove directly to his apartment, texting him to meet me outside rather than going in where Andrea might be. When he approached my car, his expression was already defensive. He knew why I was there. This has to stop, I told him, my voice shaking with emotion. I never agreed to pay for your wedding. The assumptions, the announcements, the pressure, it's not fair, Jason. Andrea was just excited, he defended weakly. A day that should reflect what you two can actually afford. His next words cut deep. I didn't realize your support came with conditions. It's not about conditions, I countered. It's about respect and reality. I worked hard for my financial stability. I made sacrifices. I can't just bankroll an extravagant wedding because Andrea wants it. Jason's expression hardened. I see someone who could easily help but chooses not to, he replied. Someone who'd rather see her brother embarrassed than write a check she wouldn't even miss. The conversation devolved from there, ending with Jason storming back toward his apartment building and me sitting in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I received a text from Andrea. If you don't help with the wedding as discussed, don't bother coming. Family supports family. Guess we know where you stand. 10 years ago. But I was building something. Most importantly, I was in love with Michael Sullivan, my college sweetheart who had proposed on our 3rd anniversary. Michael was creative, spontaneous, and thoughtful, everything I sometimes wasn't with my structured approach to life. He worked as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, and together, we represented that perfect balance of practical and passionate. At least that's what I thought. Our engagement was announced with a simple dinner with both families. The ring was modest, a small diamond that caught the light just right, but it was what we could afford. More importantly, it represented our shared values. Building something meaningful together. Step by step, we agreed on a practical approach to our wedding. My parents offered $5,000, a generous gift we gratefully accepted. Michael's parents contributed the same. We would cover the rest through careful saving over our 18-month engagement. We created spreadsheets together, allocating funds for the venue, a charming community center by the lake, catering, a local family restaurant rather than a formal caterer, and flowers, seasonal blooms from the farmer's market that my aunt would arrange. Every paycheck, I dutifully transferred money to our wedding savings account. Weekend brunches were replaced with home-cooked meals. I took on freelance financial consulting work on weekends. Michael picked up extra design projects. We were building our day together brick by brick. 6 months before the wedding, I noticed subtle changes in Michael. Then came the credit card statement. A shared card we use for household expenses showed charges I didn't recognize. Online transactions to gaming sites, cash advances, payments to companies with cryptic names. When confronted, Michael broke down. "I've been gambling," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "Online at first, then at the casino outside the city. 000 of debt accumulated over 8 months, hidden through elaborate financial maneuvering. Our wedding fund had been drained. Worse, he had taken out loans in both our names, using our future together as collateral for his addiction. I was devastated. Beyond the money was the breach of trust. The foundation of our relationship cracked beyond recognition. Yet despite everything, I still loved him. And I was embarrassed. How could I, a financial professional, have missed the signs? What would my colleagues say? My family? So I made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I liquidated my small investment portfolio, took a loan against my 401k, and paid off Michael's gambling debts. Not for him, but to protect both our credit scores and to avoid the humiliation of our families discovering what had happened. The wedding was quietly canceled. To my family, we had simply grown apart and wanted different things. Only Tara knew the full truth. My parents were disappointed but supportive, never pressuring me for details I wasn't ready to share. The financial setback took years to overcome. I worked overtime, lived with minimal expenses, and slowly rebuilt my savings and retirement funds. A measure of independence I would never compromise again. And now, 10 years later, I was being asked to fund another wedding, not even my own, but one far more lavish than I would ever have considered for myself. The irony was physically painful. After Andrea's ultimatum text, I spent a sleepless night wrestling with what to do. His usual easygoing expression replaced with wary defensiveness. "I have something to tell you," I began, sitting on a bench overlooking the duck pond. "I'm not refusing to help because I don't care about you," I concluded. "I'm refusing because I know that financial decisions have long-term consequences." His expression softened with understanding, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the brother I'd grown up with. But that glimpse faded as he shifted uncomfortably. "I get it now. And I'm sorry for what happened to you," he said. "But this is different. Andrea isn't hiding anything. She just wants our special day to be perfect. Perfect doesn't have to mean expensive." I countered gently. "For Andrea it does." His voice took on a pleading quality. "You know how much this means to her. To us. We've already put down non-refundable deposits we can't afford to lose." "That was a choice you made without confirming my contribution," I reminded him. "Because we thought we could count on you." Frustration edged back into his tone. "Everyone else in the family understands how important this is. Why can't you?" We went in circles for another hour, neither truly hearing the other. Finally, Jason stood up. "So that's your final answer? You won't help?" "I'll give you what I can comfortably afford as a wedding gift," I offered. "The amount I'd planned all along. But I can't fund the entire event." His expression hardened. "That's not enough, and you know it." That evening, I received a lengthy text from Andrea, clearly written in an emotional state. "Jason told me about your conversation. I'm sorry about your past relationship, but I don't see how that's relevant to our situation. If you cared about your brother's happiness, you would support our day. We've already announced the venue and details to our friends. Do you know how humiliating it would be to downgrade everything now? If you don't help as we've been planning all along, don't bother coming to the wedding. Family supports family. Guess we know where you stand. Jason followed with his own message, shorter but equally painful. With a heavy heart but newfound resolve, I chose the latter. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an unexpected text from Jason. We'd still like you to come. Family should be together. I later learned from my mother that they had substantially downgraded their plans, moving from the Napa Vineyard to a local country club, cutting the guest list by half, and eliminating some of the more extravagant elements. They're making it work, Mom explained during our weekly phone call. It's still lovely, just not what they originally envisioned. And Andrea's parents had extended themselves beyond their comfortable limit. After considerable reflection and a lengthy session with Dr. Mitchell, I decided to attend. Not because I approved of their choices or the way they had treated me, but because I valued the possibility of maintaining a relationship with my brother beyond this conflict. Everything felt either too extravagant, appearing to validate their excess, or too understated, potentially reading as protest. Was my first encounter with Andrea since the bridal shower confrontation. She greeted me with air kisses and a brittle smile. "So glad you could make it," she said, her eyes already scanning the room for other guests. Jason's hug was stiff, perfunctory. "Thanks for coming, Cass," he said, before being pulled away by his future father-in-law. I found myself seated at a table with distant relatives and friends of the bride's family, effectively isolated from the main wedding party. Throughout the evening, I caught snippets of conversations about the scaled-back celebration, with Andrea loudly lamenting the compromises they'd been forced to make. We had to cancel the Dove release. I overheard her telling her bridesmaids, and downgrade from the hand-calligraphed place cards to printed ones. "It's fine. We're making it work." Her tone suggested it was anything but fine. When Jason stood to make his rehearsal dinner speech, he thanked his parents and Andrea's parents for their incredible generosity, pointedly excluding me from the acknowledgments. The omission was noticed by my mother, who squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. Back in my hotel room that night, I called Tara for moral support. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Uncomfortable," I admitted. "Like everyone knows about the conflict, but nobody wants to address it directly. Andrea's basically pretending I don't exist, and Jason is barely communicating." "Remember why you're there," Tara reminded me. "Not to approve of their choices, but to leave the door open for a relationship after the wedding dust settles. This is a weekend out of your life." The brother in those photos felt distant from the man who had been so willing to sacrifice our relationship for an extravagant party. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony planned at the country club. From my hotel window, apparently they're the wrong shade of pink. Jason's trying to calm her down, but she's on a warpath. Ceremony might start late. I thanked her for the warning and took extra time getting ready. While not a Napa Vineyard, was undeniably beautiful. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees surrounding the ceremony space. A string quartet played softly as guests were seated. Fresh flower petals lined the aisle. Even with the compromises, this was far from a modest celebration. I slipped into a seat in the middle section, not wanting to be too prominent but not hiding either. Several relatives nodded in my direction, but few approached for conversation. The tension surrounding my presence was palpable. His voice cracked slightly when promising to stand by Andrea through all life's challenges, a sincerity that reminded me of the brother I knew and loved. Andrea was radiant in a fitted lace gown that I estimated cost at least 5 figures. As she spoke her vows, her eyes never left Jason's face, her expression one of genuine adoration. Whatever my concerns about their financial decisions, their love for each other seemed authentic. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I mingled cautiously, sticking to safe conversations about the weather and the lovely venue. Several guests commented on the family resemblance between Jason and me. Her gestures were animated, his responses short and clipped. They separated abruptly, Andrea heading toward her bridesmaids while Jason made a beeline for the bar. The reception began with the traditional entrance of the wedding party, followed by the couple's first dance to a live band's rendition of "Can't Help Falling in Love." As I watched them sway on the dance floor, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: happiness for their love, concern for their future, and lingering hurt from the conflict that had damaged our relationship. Dinner was served. A multi-course meal featuring filet mignon and Chilean sea bass that I knew must have strained their already overextended budget. The centerpieces were elaborate arrangements of orchids and roses. The table settings included gold-rimmed chargers and crystal glassware. No expense had been spared, despite the downsizing. Andrea's complaints about the compromises became more vocal. The photographer better have captured the ceremony perfectly, I overheard her telling a bridesmaid. We had to cancel the videographer to cut costs. By the time the cake cutting came around, tension was visible between the newlyweds. What should have been a playful, joyful moment became stilted and performative. After feeding each other cake for the cameras, Andrea whispered something to Jason that made his smile falter. I remained at my table, speaking with the other guests seated there, deliberately avoiding drawing attention. My plan was to stay through the important moments, then make a quiet exit before things devolved further. But Andrea had other plans. As the reception moved into the dancing portion of the evening, I remained at my table, nursing a glass of wine and watching the celebration unfold. I noticed Jason making repeated trips to the bar, returning each time with a slightly less steady gait. Andrea had kicked off her heels, her carefully styled hair now coming loose, her movements becoming less coordinated as she moved from guest to guest. I decided it was time for a graceful exit. I had congratulated the couple briefly during the receiving line, left my gift on the designated table, and fulfilled the minimal obligations of a guest. As I gathered my clutch and wrap, preparing to slip out unnoticed, Andrea's voice cut through the music. Leaving so soon, Cassandra? She stood at the edge of my table, champagne flute in hand, her wedding gown slightly smudged at the hem from dancing. Despite her disheveled appearance, her eyes were sharp, focused. I was just about to say goodnight, I replied evenly. It was a beautiful wedding. Congratulations again. Beautiful but not what it could have been, she said, her voice rising slightly. Several nearby guests glanced our way. Do you know we had to cancel our honeymoon because of you? I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. Andrea, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. When is the right time? She took an unsteady step closer. After you've ruined what should have been the happiest day of my life? By now, the guests at neighboring tables had fallen silent, attention fixed on our exchange. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jason moving through the crowd toward us, his expression alarmed. I'm not going to engage in this discussion right now, I said quietly. This is your wedding day. You should be celebrating with your guests. Jason had reached us now, placing a hand on his new wife's arm. Let's go dance. This isn't the time. She shook off his hand. No, I want to know why. Why your sister, who makes 6 figures and lives in a luxury condo, couldn't help give us the wedding we deserved. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. I'm sorry you feel that way, Andrea. My financial decisions are personal, just as yours are. Personal? She gave a harsh laugh. There's nothing personal about being selfish. You could have helped but chose not to. Jason stepped between us. Cass, please don't make this worse. Make it worse. The injustice of his statement broke through my composure. I'm not the one creating a scene at a wedding reception. Andrea pushed past Jason, leaning across the table toward me. You know what your problem is? You're just jealous. Jealous that your brother found someone to love him enough to marry him, while you're alone because no one can stand your controlling, cold personality. The personal attack stung, especially given the truth she couldn't possibly know about my past with Michael. But I refused to stoop to her level. I've worked hard for everything I have, I said quietly. I don't apologize for being careful with the results of that hard work. Careful? Andrea scoffed. You're just selfish and bitter. A real sister would have helped without question. A real sister, I replied, standing now to gather my things, knows that sometimes the most helpful thing isn't giving people whatever they demand. I don't know which part of my response triggered her, but Andrea's face contorted with rage. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward. 200 guests froze in collective shock. Andrea stood before me, mascara streaking down her flushed face, chest heaving with emotion. Jason remained paralyzed a few feet away. Andrea's father stepped forward, attempting to guide his daughter away, but she shook him off. "Get out," she hissed at me. "Get out of our wedding." With as much dignity as I could muster, I collected my wrap and clutch. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said to Jason, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I hope it brings you happiness." Without waiting for a response, I walked toward the exit, the crowd of guests parting silently to let me through. My cheek burned, but my posture remained straight, my pace measured. Only when I reached my car in the darkened parking lot did I allow the tears to fall. The drive back to my hotel passed in a blur of streetlights and suppressed sobs. In my room, I finally broke down completely, crying not just for the humiliation of the evening but for the relationship with my brother that seemed irreparably damaged. Unable to find words to explain what had happened or how I felt about it. Instead, I stood before the mirror, examining the red mark on my cheek that would likely bruise by morning. The physical pain was already fading, but the emotional wound felt raw and gaping. I thought about calling Tara but realized it was after midnight. Instead, I sent her a brief text. Only a bone-deep exhaustion and a determination to put this chapter behind me. As first light filtered through the hotel curtains, I packed my bags, checked out, and headed to the airport for an earlier flight than originally planned. Boston, and the life I'd built there, couldn't come soon enough. The morning after the wedding, my phone was flooded with notifications. 16 missed calls from my parents, 23 text messages from various family members, 3 voicemails from cousins who had witnessed the confrontation, a lengthy, emoji-filled message from Tara demanding details and offering to come key Andrea's car. A joke? But one that made me smile through my exhaustion. Most surprising was a text from Brian, Jason's best man and childhood friend. "What happened last night was completely out of line. Just wanted you to know not everyone thinks you did anything wrong. Hope you're okay." His small act of kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes as I settled into my window seat for the flight back to Boston. It was the first indication that not everyone viewed me as the villain in this drama. The following week passed in a blur of work meetings and forced normalcy. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office and bringing work home on weekends. Anything to avoid the empty silence of my condo where thoughts of Jason and our fractured relationship filled the spaces between moments. My social media updates were carefully curated to avoid any wedding photos that relatives inevitably shared. I wasn't ready to see their smiling faces, the elaborate decorations, or the carefully posed family pictures from which I had been excluded after my hasty exit. My weekly session with Dr. Mitchell became a lifeline. Sitting in her peaceful office, would it have been easier to just write the check? Was my financial boundary worth losing my relationship with my brother? Dr. Mitchell's response was measured but firm. "The question isn't whether your boundary was worth the outcome. It's whether the relationship as it existed was sustainable." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Relationships based on financial transactions rather than mutual respect eventually collapse under their own weight," she explained. "By standing firm, you've created the possibility for a healthier relationship in the future, if both sides are willing to rebuild on different terms." Her perspective helped, but the ache remained. I missed the brother who had taught me to skip stones across the lake in our childhood summers, who had called me first when he got into his dream college, who had once known me better than anyone. 3 weeks after the wedding, my parents came to visit. I had been avoiding their calls, responding with brief texts assuring them I was fine, but not ready to discuss what had happened. Their unannounced appearance at my door on a Saturday morning left me no option but to face the conversation. To my surprise, they came not to pressure me but to apologize. "We should have stepped in sooner," my father said, his usual confident demeanor subdued. "We saw the unreasonable expectations being placed on you and said nothing." My mother reached for my hand. "We were so caught up in Jason's happiness that we forgot to consider yours. That wasn't fair." Their acknowledgement of their role in the situation released something tight in my chest. We spent the day together, walking through the Boston Public Garden, sharing lunch at my favorite cafe, talking about everything except the wedding until evening came and the topic could no longer be avoided. Have you heard from him? I finally asked as we shared takeout in my living room. The wedding debt is substantial. Andrea's still not working, and reality is setting in. I nodded, unsure how to feel about their difficulties. I didn't wish them hardship, but perhaps the financial reality check was necessary. As my parents prepared to leave the next day, Mom hugged me tightly. Give it time, she whispered. Family finds its way back together. Even after the worst storms. A month after the wedding, I received an email from Jason. The formality of the medium rather than a text or call suggested the difficulty he had in reaching out. Cass, I don't know where to begin. What happened at the wedding was inexcusable. Andrea's behavior was completely out of line, and my failure to stand up for you was just as bad. The past few weeks have been a wake-up call in many ways. We're facing the consequences of our financial decisions, and it's not pretty. I realize now how unfair our expectations of you were. You worked hard for your success while I took the easier path and then expected you to supplement the difference. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, just acknowledging that you deserved better from your brother. When you're ready, I'd like to talk. Jay. I read the email multiple times, emotions cycling through relief, vindication, lingering hurt. But I've never stopped caring about you. I need some time, but yes, when we're both ready, we can talk. Take care of yourself. Cassandra. It was a small step, but an important one. For the first time since the wedding, I felt the possibility of reconciliation, however distant. 3 months later, Jason suggested meeting for coffee when he would be in Boston for a work conference. We chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between my office and his hotel. Walking there, standing awkwardly as I approached. Thanks for suggesting it, I replied. The first 15 minutes were filled with careful small talk, work updates, the unusually warm fall weather, a new restaurant that had opened near my condo. Then, as the initial awkwardness began to fade, Jason set down his coffee cup with purpose. I need to properly apologize, he began, not just for Andrea's behavior at the wedding, but for everything leading up to it. The expectations, the pressure, the entitlement. You were right to set boundaries, and I was wrong to make you feel guilty for it. His sincerity was evident, but I needed to understand more. What changed? After the wedding, I mean. Jason sighed. Reality hit hard. The credit card bills came due. Andrea finally realized that Instagram perfect lives usually come with debt that isn't visible in the photos. He paused. We're seeing a financial counselor now. It's been illuminating. And Andrea? I asked carefully. She's embarrassed about what happened, he admitted. Not ready to face you yet, but working through some things. She's back at work, which helps. We talked for over 2 hours, longer than either of us had planned. There were difficult moments. His admission that he had resented my financial success. My confession about how deeply his disappointment had hurt me. But there were also glimpses of the connection we once shared. Moments of genuine laughter amid the serious conversation. Meaning it despite the work I knew it would require from both of us. Over the following months, our relationship slowly began to heal. Weekly phone calls. Occasional visits. Careful conversations that grew more comfortable with time. Andrea eventually sent a written apology that, while somewhat stiff, seemed sincere in its acknowledgement of her inappropriate behavior. My own journey continued as well. Working with Dr. Mitchell, I examined how my experience with Michael had shaped my relationship with money and my boundaries with family. I began dating again, more openly this time, sharing my values around financial compatibility early rather than fearing judgment. The most important lesson from this painful chapter wasn't about money at all, but about authenticity. True love, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, doesn't come with a price tag. It doesn't demand financial sacrifices to prove its worth. It respects boundaries, but ultimately led to more honest relationships across all areas of my life. I learned that my worth isn't measured by my willingness to fund others' dreams. When Jason and Andrea invited me to a small dinner celebrating their first anniversary, a modest gathering at their apartment with home-cooked food and meaningful conversation, I accepted with an open heart. The journey hadn't been easy, but the authenticity of our newly defined relationship was worth every painful step along the way. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members about money? How did they respond? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember that standing in your truth is never selfish. It's the foundation for genuine relationships that can weather any storm. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength in your own boundary-setting journey.